It became clear to me that I was spreading my schedule too thin in terms of had meetings scattered everywhere. Like if you're only working 3 days a week, well, guess what? You have to shift meetings to only be on 3 days a week or less, right? Because there's only 3 days you're allowing yourself to work. Right. So it was really kind of trial and error that I figured out what I needed to optimize, but I realized I needed to hire more people. I was doing too much myself that the CEO didn't need to be doing in those companies, needed to delegate more, and I needed to say no more. It was kind of a trial and error thing that with the clients I've worked with, it's been different for each one of them, but there's a lot of overlap.
Well, today's speaker is someone that I think everyone should listen to because I think everyone needs her advice. So my speaker today is a business strategist. She's a lifestyle designer. She's an attorney and she's an author, and she has a new book coming out called The Vacation Effect for Entrepreneurs. She also has a coaching and training company that helps busy entrepreneurs create the freedom without sacrificing business growth. And on top of all of that, she is a 7-figure entrepreneur running 3 companies across 3 different industries. And she only works an average of 3 days a week. So welcome, Denise Gosnell.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, absolutely. So I want to dig in right away because I want to know, how do you do it? I mean, how do you grow a business working less? Especially 3 days.
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's one that I struggled first to find the answer to that, to actually figure out how to do that. And is it okay if I take you back to what caused me to find the solution? Because it'll make more sense and more people can relate. Okay, perfect. So I was a workaholic entrepreneur running those same 3 companies, working 80 hours a week. And there was a life-changing moment where my house was on fire. I didn't know we were on fire, but there was a knock on my front door. Fireman comes to the door and he says, "You're on fire. You need to get out immediately. By the way, what do you want us to retrieve in the next 5 minutes before your house is destroyed by fire and water?"
Wow.
And so like that, I didn't know my house was on fire, but what was more surprising was how I answered his question.
So how did you answer it?
Yeah. So what I had him retrieve were all sentimental things. Mm-hmm. They were my daughter's favorite stuffed animal. She was 5 at the time. My wedding photos that I didn't have digitally because it was before digital cameras, from almost 30 years ago now. It was my grandmother's blanket that she made me as a child, and she's now deceased. So it's one of the only possessions I have of my grandmother's. So it was all sentimental things that I had them retrieve. And so, Kathy, what was so interesting is I stood there with my husband in our neighbor's garage for 8 hours watching them put out the fire.
Oh, wow.
And I sat there, just kept reeling back in my head how I had answered that question, going, it's all burning, all the fancy artwork. It was my dream house, Homerama house. I'd worked, my husband and I both had worked so hard to buy this dream home that won all the awards in the home show, best of show and all that. And I'm like, and all I had to retrieve was those sentimental things, not the artwork, not the jewelry, not all that other stuff, because those are things that can be replaced. Mm-hmm. So that was when I realized that I had been living my life and I wasn't in alignment with my true priorities. So that was when I decided that I was going to figure out the answer to your question. How can I have free time and business growth and not sacrifice one over the other?
Right.
But the sad part is, for the first few years after the fire, I'd work less and my revenue would go down.
Oh.
I'd work more, my revenue would go up. And it was like this cycle. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's got to be a better way. I'm sure other people who are watching this can relate to that. It's like you hustle and grind, and your revenue goes up, and you stop working and your revenue goes down. Well, I one day went to a meditation retreat, and the goal was to find the answer to that question. How can I have both free time and business growth? And it's like God whispering in my ear. What I got from that retreat that came loud and clear was, all you have to do is decide and make today what you want tomorrow to be. It was said to me just like that. All you have to do is decide, make today what you want tomorrow to be. I don't know if you noticed, that's my email footer now, when you and I have been emailing back and forth. Like that changed my life. But so what I did in order to create this schedule, I'd always dreamed of the 3-day work week. I always wanted this Tuesday, Thursday off schedule, where those would be my, what I now call freedom days. But what I decided to do after that meditation retreat was to just do a 30-day experiment with the dream schedule I'd always wanted. It's like it's easier to commit to just 30 days than it is to change your life forever, right? Just
Right,
something you've
right,
been wanting to
exactly.
dip your toe into. What if we all just did a 30-day experiment of that thing we've always wanted to do? It's not permanent. You're not promising you're going to do it forever. But that was like 8 business days, right? So that was the equivalent of taking like a week vacation. I'm like, I can do that. It wasn't as scary that way.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
guess what happened when I did my 30-day experiment with the 3-day work week?
Your business grew?
The first 30 days, it sucked.
Oh,
It was
I was going to say, did it grow?
I mean, it
Did
was
it not
wonderful having
grow?
the time off, but no, but actually, it did end up growing. But the first 30 days, it sucked because I loved having those 8 business days off. It felt so
Right.
freeing and everything, but it was so intense because what it did was it identified all my inefficiencies in my companies. All the places I wasn't
Mm,
delegating, where I was lacking staff, where I was doing things that the company should have been saying no to, where I was wasting time surfing the internet or being distracted in constant meetings spread around all over the whole week, no focus blocks. Like it identified all the flaws in what I was doing wrong.
right.
But what I did was I gave myself permission to do another experiment at the end
So
of
did
that 30
you,
days.
so after that 30 days and your revenue went down, how did you get to that point saying, oh my gosh, okay, I need to do something different? I mean, was it,
Yeah. Well, my revenue didn't go down that 30 days, but it stayed the same.
it stayed the same?
But
Okay.
what I did was I'm like, okay, I really liked having this free time.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I've identified things that are broken in my company, mostly because of me and the way I was running it, across those 3 companies, I decided to extend the experiment for another 30 days. So I would continue to feel the pinch. If I only allow myself to work 3 days a week, then guess what? It forces you to do things differently. It
Okay.
forces you to identify where you're wasting time, to delegate more, to not waste time in meetings you don't need to be in, to say no more often. It just forces you to start acting differently. So that's what I did. I continued it another 30 days, 90 days, and literally I kept extending it until it became a way of life. And that year I ended up making the most money that I'd ever made in my life up until that point when I had worked the least,
Wow.
40% less than I'd ever worked before.
Wow.
But it was only because I worked on optimizing the inefficiencies I had identified. That's what I was missing before. I wasn't incrementally optimizing what the problems were. I would just work less. If you work less and do nothing differently, your revenue will go down. That was what I learned. You have to actually do something differently. But that led me to realizing that principle that I call grow by subtraction, how you grow by doing less. And that was what you were asking at the beginning.
Yes, absolutely. Growth by subtraction, which I really do want to dig into. I want to dig into two things. First off, how did you identify what you had to optimize?
Yeah. So what happened was it became clear to me that I was spreading my schedule too thin in terms of had meetings scattered everywhere. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you're only working 3 days a week, well, guess what? You have to shift meetings to only be on 3 days a week or less, right? Because there's
Right,
only 3 days you're allowing yourself to work.
right.
So it was really kind of trial and error that I figured out what I needed to optimize. But I realized I needed to hire more people. I was doing too much myself that the CEO didn't need to be doing in those companies. Needed to
Mm-hmm.
delegate more, and I needed to say no more. It was kind of a trial and error thing that with the clients I've worked with, it's been different for each one of them, but there's a lot of overlap.
Okay. Okay. So, the growth by subtraction. So that's basically what you did is you found where your inefficiencies were, maybe people who were better in certain areas than you were, and delegated to those folks, so that you could really kind of be in your zone of genius, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then did you set up like, when you said, say, you're talking about no's, are those like you set up like almost like these non negotiables that I'm only going to do meetings from this time to this time and, not crossing over your boundaries or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, for example, if my call days, even to this day,
Hmm.
I have certain call days. And if it's not one of those call days, I just say, I'm sorry, I'm not available that day. Here are two other options. They don't need to know
Okay.
what I'm doing on those days, whether they're work days or not. I don't owe anyone an explanation to what my
Hmm.
availability is.
Hmm. Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that's where a lot of entrepreneurs are too accommodating of other people's agendas instead of their own agenda, building their business around their life instead of their life around their business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what it is we're trying to please everyone and trying to accommodate everyone. But I think what happens when you do that is you spread yourself too thin, right?
Mhm.
And exactly what you said, you're running your business, you're not really running your life more than
Mhm.
anything else. So let's talk about freedom. What is your definition of freedom in your mind?
Yeah. So to me, freedom is a mindset, not a destination. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Freedom is a decision that you make that you choose to have. It's not a milestone that you reach. I used to be guilty of this, thinking that, someday when I have more time, someday when I have this certain level of money, then I'll take more time off or I'll do those things I've always wanted to do. Like it's a destination that you arrive at, like you do in your car. That's what I
Mm-hmm.
used to think freedom was. That once I get to that, then I can have freedom. But what I learned was that after my fire was that freedom is a decision you make. Everyone watching this right now can actually decide right now that they're going to have a freedom lifestyle. And then
Okay.
you build your business around your lifestyle. And you can do so without sacrificing your business growth. So to me, freedom is a mindset, not a destination. But Kathy, what's sad is that so many people they tend to have the definition that I used to have, and they think, okay, well, someday maybe or when I have more time
Mm-hmm.
or money, I'll donate time to that charity or money to that charity, or I'll take that trip I've always wanted to take. But the sad part is, most people never actually get around to that until they're either too old to enjoy the
Mm-hmm.
thing they were going to do, don't have the money, or they don't have the health.
Right.
I'm on a
Exactly.
mission to say, I call those the someday maybes. All those someday maybe I'll do this thing. That's just a version of future joy that you're depriving yourself of. So I'm always helping my clients figure out, what are those someday maybes? Let's either find a way to bring them into the now, or just give yourself permission to let them go and say, what, I'm never going to do that, nor do I want to hold myself accountable to that anymore. I used to say, someday I'm going to learn to cook. It's like, I don't like cooking. I don't want to know how to be a cook. I want to pay someone who loves to cook to be my chef or to
Okay.
prepare meals for me. That was a someday maybe I killed off. But all those other same someday maybes, I used to say, someday maybe I'll buy a house in Sedona. Well, guess what? As you know, I have a
And you
second
did.
home in Sedona. I caught myself saying that 4 or 5 times, and I've trained myself to watch for those someday maybes. And if I keep looping it, it's like, wait a minute, I'm calling BS on myself right now to say it's either going to happen in some way now, or I'm going to let it go and kick it to the curb because it doesn't deserve to be taking up space. I'm either going to live in the now and have joy, or I'm going, and that doesn't mean you buy something you can't afford, but
Mm-hmm.
you can find a way to do a version of it right now, even if it's planning the thing for the future, or taking a mini vacation, or traveling to Sedona to stay at a hotel or a friend's house instead of buying the house there. There's always a version of it you can do now. So to me,
Absolutely.
that's freedom. It's living your someday maybes in some form now and building your business around your life. And what happens, though, the magic ingredient I think that made me finally succeed at pulling off that 2 day freedom day, the 3 day
Mm-hmm.
work week
Right.
on average, I adjusted as I travel and whatnot, but that's the average, was the idea of what I call forced hyper efficiency. So it's an
Okay.
interesting word, isn't it?
So
Forced
let's
hyper
talk about
efficiency.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened when I did my experiment was I was forcing myself to figure out how to get things done in 3 days instead of 6 or 7, like I used to work.
Was it
And what's
stressful though to do that? Or tell me about
at
that.
first, the first few weeks it was, but what I noticed was it's like when you're about to go on vacation. Have you ever
Mm-hmm.
noticed, Kathy, how when you get ready to go on vacation, you magically get like a month's worth of work done in the 3 days before you leave? And you're like, man, I wish I could be that productive all the time. Well,
Right.
that's what I was doing. That's what I call forced hyper efficiency. What's happening in that circumstance is that you're prioritizing well, you're forcing yourself to prioritize well, you are delegating or deferring the stuff that you're just not going to have time to get done, and you're doing the stuff that you do need to do really well and quickly. You're
Okay.
cutting out all the fluff. It's
Right.
forcing you to prioritize well. So what I did by creating my 3-day work week that I did first as the experiment, I started forcing myself to become hyper efficient because it was a non-negotiable. You know what? I am tired of working 80 hours a week and not being there for my family in the moments that matter. And I'm just going to figure this out as I go. And so by having that, so what I would encourage other people to do is start with, what do you want, and test your, dip your toes in the water and start testing that and optimize your inefficiencies as you go. And like build your life around your
Mm-hmm.
business around your life instead of your life around your business. Because if you don't, you're never going to have freedom. It just doesn't happen.
Right. Right. So when you're working with people about trying to, over this um, forced efficiency, is there, I guess, are there steps? I mean, you said prioritize, delegate, do what you need to do, and cut out the fluff. But sometimes I think when my feeling is like when you first go into it, you're going to have this sense of, I wouldn't say overwhelm, but like, oh my gosh, there is a lot to do. And how do I delegate these things? I mean, do you have systems? Do you put systems in place? Tell
Yeah.
me like what you did that seemed to work really, really well, because I know everybody wants to know.
Yeah. There are a lot of things that I did, but if I had to pick like just one or two, like the ones that were the biggest needle movers for me,
Hmm.
one of them was the process by which I prioritize and determine what I'm going to work on.
Okay.
And that is basically doing a brain dump. Most of us have some semblance of a daily task list or a
Hmm.
project list that we're like trying to decide, okay, how am I going to spend my time today? Like that magic moment of, what am I going to give my attention to today?
Right.
And
Right.
so I have a really unique process that I've never seen anyone else do that totally changed my life when I just kept playing around with it and found what worked for me and have shared it with other clients. And that is, after you do that brain dump of all the
Hmm.
things that you're considering doing today, what if you looked at that list and you said, okay, which of these two or three things, and maybe it's just one on a certain day, but most of the time it's two or three, that if I did nothing else today, they would be big needle movers for the company. It's stuff only I can do. It's like the whole Pareto principle. Yeah, we've all heard the
Hmm.
Pareto principle before about the 80-20 rule.
Right.
80% of our effort produces 20% of the results. Most of the stuff we're doing is only producing 20% of the results, but there's 20% of our effort that if we focused on the right thing could produce 80% of the results. So I trained
Absolutely.
myself in my task list to circle those two or three levers and
Hmm.
identify what are those things that if I did nothing else but that, those little tasks, that it would be the 20-80, where it's the 20% of the effort, but it would produce 80% of the results. I mean, it's not always 80-20, it's not always
Right.
20-80, whatever, but it's the idea behind what is the door swinger? What's the lever, that
Okay.
makes this big thing happen? And I just started doing that incrementally day after day after day. And then everything else on my list, I would apply a time hack to. I have this
Okay.
worksheet where I have this list of time hacks where I'd be like, okay, these are my needle movers. And then, okay, I'm going to try to apply a time hack to all the rest of these. One of the time hacks is to delegate it to a team member. That way, you're not the one doing it. Another time hack might be to batch certain things together, like a bunch of email responses. Why would
Okay.
you jump around and do 50 of them 50 different times during the day when you could sit down for an hour and do all 50 responses?
Right.
So it's just like, that thought process of identifying the levers and then applying a time hack to your entire to-do list. That process was a game changer for me.
Okay. Wow.
I hope that makes sense.
No, it absolutely no. The reason I paused for a second because I'm actually thinking to myself about it on what I'm going to implement in my business as well. And I love the 80-20 rule. I've used that like and that applies in so many different circumstances, but I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely agree. If we can look at the 1 to 2 things that move the needle forward in our business and then absolutely batch the rest of it, delegate the rest of it, that's really great.
Thank you.
So, how do you stop from violating this? Do you understand what I'm saying? Because there's going to be things that won't move the needle forward.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh, I can just do this instead of delegating. Is it a mindset thing? Tell me what we can do.
Yeah, it's a mindset and it's a habit. Like it, and I'm not always perfect either. There might be times when I choose to do something that I should have delegated it. And then I'm like, why didn't I delegate that? My team
Mhm.
is never going to learn how to do that task if I don't let them do it. So I catch myself, like what I was talking about with the someday maybes. Like when I catch myself doing something like that, where I did it and really it should have been delegated, what
Mhm.
I often will do is I'll quickly go back and record what it was I did, like on a Loom video,
Okay.
where I'll explain what it was I did and why, while it's still fresh in my mind while I caught myself. And
Mhm.
then I send it off to the team and say, please look at the work product on this. Please look at the Loom video. And then next time it comes up, I'm going to ask you to do that.
Oh, that's great.
So
I
that's a
love
great
that.
way of, because delegating is key, and delegating is key with proper procedures. If the team doesn't know how to do it, how are they ever going to know if we don't transfer the knowledge? If we don't
Mhm.
teach them how to think like Kathy, I mean, not that they can't also think like themselves, but it's like the knowledge transfer from one person to another has to happen somehow.
Absolutely. And with Loom, I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
such an efficient way of giving the information in your own voice too, which I
Mm-hmm.
absolutely love.
Yeah, and then a hack to that is to then take the Loom video and have that person turn it into a procedure,
Mm.
and have you read the procedure and make sure that they understood you correctly before you have them go implementing it. Because a lot of times I've been surprised, Kathy, at how
Hmm.
what comes back in the procedure
Hmm.
is different than what I said in the video, at least
Oh,
from my perspective, but they misunderstood, so I wasn't clear. I thought I was being clear. Guess what? I'm going to get inconsistent results if it wasn't clear.
right.
And then I'm going to be frustrated with the team member who's just doing what they heard me say or the way they understood me to be saying it. But if something wasn't clear, guess what? We're going to get inconsistent results. So using the video to turn it into the procedure, which then lets me validate they understood the process correctly. And then once that's the case, they turn the procedure into a checklist, which is just a summary of the procedure. So
Oh, that's
that is the magic way that I've scaled my different companies, in terms of delegating my knowledge to those of my team.
so. Where, out of curiosity, because this thought popped in my mind. So once you have the procedure that has been checked by you and it gets implemented, do you have, as a way to be efficient in your company, do you have a place that you store your procedures so that everyone new coming into the company, or if they forget maybe something that doesn't happen very often, that they can go in there to look at what it is?
Yeah, we have a procedures library. So, the team members can go in and, they know to follow the procedure on all the different things. And there might come a point where they like have done it 1,000 times that they don't
Mhm.
look at the procedure anymore, but they're
Right.
supposed to always be following the procedure. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that makes it makes it amazing, because it's easy. If a team member is out, another team member can pick it up even if they've never done it before and follow the instructions, because
Hmm.
competent people can follow instructions. When it's like, log into this system, do this, do this, do this, like there's screenshots, it's well documented, anyone could follow it with that type of a background. Now there might be an exception, like on some complicated programming thing or
Hmm.
something, but most of our procedures are not of that nature.
Okay. I think that's really a great point, because I think as entrepreneurs, we're running so fast
Mhm.
and not and working more than 3 days a week. So that's also one of those, okay, someday I'm going to put this together so someone else can do it. I'll put this procedure. So that's actually a really great point. Let's just do it.
Mhm. Record
So
yourself doing it, even if you're not explaining what you're doing. Just hit record on Loom as you're doing the task, even if you're not telling them what you're doing, and have somebody try to figure it out and create a procedure. That's like the bare minimum. That's the easiest way to get procedures created. Is just record yourself working on certain topics, and if you can annotate from time to time, that makes it easier for them to decipher what you're doing.
right. So
So,
just going, yeah.
yeah,
No, that's
but
great.
but at least
So
it's better than nothing, right, Kathy?
right. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. It's absolutely better than nothing. So if
yeah.
nothing else, they'll be able to do part of it. Maybe they'll still have to come to you for something.
Hmm.
But then once they learn what that is, then maybe we can delegate, okay, can you fill in the rest of the procedure? Right.
Exactly.
So I love that. I mean, I've used Loom before, but I haven't used it quite to the same, because I had exactly what you said. Like it came back and it wasn't what I said. And
Hmm.
so I was like, but that's good that you can check it and then go back and then implement it.
Exactly.
So I was missing a step there.
Exactly. And you didn't realize you were being unclear. And that would have
Hmm.
led to frustration on your part because you thought they weren't following instructions.
Hmm.
Instead, your instructions weren't clear.
Right.
So there was a gap that you weren't aware of. So that it's like the mirroring it back is always great to let you make sure everybody's on the same page before they
Absolutely.
then turn it into a checklist that's wrong and taking it down the wrong path. That's
Yes.
why I recommend the procedure before the checklist, because the checklist just summarizes what you've already approved.
Yes. And plus it'll limit all the questions because I recently was in a situation I thought to myself, why are they asking me so many questions?
Mm-hmm.
So that's great. I'm
Yeah.
gonna implement that in my business as well. A little
Yeah,
bit
that's
more.
a huge needle mover. And it's so interesting because when you get good at, forced hyper efficiency, like we were talking about, where you limit the amount of time you're willing to work, which forces you to organize your schedule differently and to put, meetings on certain days and say no to other meeting requests or move them to a different day. It then forces you to focus on what really matters, like we talked about with the bit identifying the 2 or 3 levers each day. And then when you delegate better and you have the procedures that clone your knowledge,
Mhm.
like they all build upon each other and make you, become a forced hyper efficiency machine where you truly can claim the freedom now without your revenue going down, like what was happening to me when I just worked
Right.
less and I didn't do anything differently.
Right.
You can't, that's what most people are missing, is that whenever they work less, they're not doing anything differently. You can work less, but then use that pressure for good to make you optimize these things that if you do them, they might take a little bit of effort to record and have transcribed, the procedures and stuff, but you're doing it once forever. Think of it as
Yes.
leverage. You're cloning yourself.
Just, yeah,
Do
that
that.
one time instead of
Mm-hmm.
having to do it thousands of times. So, yes,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Denise. Really, it's been a pleasure. You've given such a thought provoking interview and so much value. So, thanks again, Denise.
Thank you so much for having me, Kathy. It's been a blast chatting with you.
Oh, absolutely. Same here.